I will begin to share my screen. Is everybody able to see this?
Yes.
Awesome. So I would like to say, first of all, thank you for coming and welcome to Mentor Monday. We are Edge, where impact and entrepreneurship thrive. Edge is a vibrant community of people from all backgrounds and walks of life who believe in entrepreneurship, who believe entrepreneurship can make a lasting change to society. We support change makers as they explore entrepreneurial approaches to creating a more equitable and sustainable world. In collaboration with our partners, Edge provides new and growing ventures with mentorship, learning programs, and support to access funding. Edge is a gateway to Sheridan's innovation resources and offers physical and virtual communities where impact entrepreneurs can thrive. So before we get started, I'd like to just do a quick land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge the land in which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. Since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous people have lived and passed through these territories. We recognize that this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. Sheridan affirms it's our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come, and we're quite grateful for the opportunity to be working and living on this land. I'm going to go through some quick Zoom rules. For the most part, we just ask that if you're in the call, just keep yourself muted when not speaking. We don't want to have too much background noise and too much people talking over each other. Webcam is not required, but definitely encouraged. Thank you, Sean, for staying on the webcam even though you're driving. It's the hustle. It's all about that. If you have any questions and you don't want to necessarily interrupt, we urge you to type them in the chat box. Myself and John will be monitoring the chat box during the session so that we can make sure any questions that you might have are answered appropriately. And one more time, this session today will be recorded and will be viewable for anybody who missed the session or if you want to refer to it later. Our agenda for today is we're going to just start with a couple introductions of each person, move into some conversation, then hopefully facilitate maybe some Q&A. Hopefully you guys have some burning questions you'd like to ask about the space that we're operating within. I'm going to quickly pass over that. Edge as a whole has 4 programs in general: Explore, Leap, Rise, and Soar. For those of you who might be starting your entrepreneurship journey and maybe have never had the opportunity to engage with Edge before, we offer programs at all 4 levels, depending on where you're situated, and definitely would like to encourage you to check out what program offerings we have and feel free to apply. There is no cost associated with any of the programs that we offer. Our mentor for today is John Lam, the Startup Man. I will let him introduce himself later as well. And we also have special guest with us, Uche Onuora, a co-founder of Hitch. And I will leave it to you to continue.
All right, awesome. I guess I'll do a quick 10-second introduction. John Lam, the Startup Man. I work here as a staff member at Edge, and I'll be facilitating this session with Uche. Mostly just gonna ask Uche some really tough questions and see what he has to say about international social ventures, and really try to understand his journey, because it's a really cool one that spans many places in the world. So Uche has a lot to offer, and with that, I'll hand it off to Uche for a quick introduction.
Thanks so much, John. Thank Cole, and thank you everyone for joining. My name is Uche Onuora. I'm a co-founder at Hitch. Hitch is an educational video platform for underserved users, teachers and students in schools in Africa. And also a venture coach at the Conestoga Venture Lab as well. But essentially my background has always been entrepreneurship, spanning stints in the US, in Nigeria, and now in Canada. Essentially, I worked in the knowledge access space and access to information space in Nigeria for about a decade and a half, and then moved here to Canada 2014. So I've been here going on 7 years this year. And I moved here because my son is on the autism spectrum. He got referred to Kids Ability, which is one of the child developmental support organizations here in Kitchener-Waterloo. I ended up going back to do my MBET, the Masters of Business, Entrepreneurship and Technology at the University of Waterloo. And actually, that's where the journey with Hitch started, because this was my venture in Hitch, and I met my co-founder Steve in the program. We worked on it and launched it, and have been on this journey since 2015, when we were full-time in the program, and full-time since we finished the program and launched it formally in late 2016. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I'm delighted and happy to share all that my experience has taught me so far. Thank you.
Awesome. So as Cole mentioned, we're gonna have a quick conversation and then get down to some Q&A. And I think given the numbers that we have, we're gonna kind of keep it like podcast style. I'm gonna ask you some questions, Uche, and then we'll let people jump in. So first off, first question is, can you describe to us that journey, you know, starting, I guess, in Nigeria and also in MBET, like from the beginning stages of Hitch? Talk to us about what that journey is.
Yeah. So I think it started with like a personal, how should I put it, a personal connection to the problem. But then it kind of went in a bunch of different directions before it kind of focused down, narrowed down to the specific focus. And often with big problems, sometimes when you're faced with a problem, we tend to kind of rush towards a solution, if you want to put it that way. And I think part of what was interesting in my journey was I've always been an entrepreneur, and I've always had an entrepreneurial attitude to problems. But the irony was that the sequencing of how to solve problems didn't become very apparent to me until I had left my career as a consultant and problem solver, and then moved to Canada and went through the MBA program. So the whole process of customer discovery, market validation is very, very critical. Sometimes entrepreneurs stumble across it, and it's great. But having a very, very aha moment towards entrepreneurship is critical. So I know what that moment was for me, and I think it was when in MBET we got introduced to the business model canvas and all of the stuff that Steve Blank was, Osterwalder was working on, and then of course with Lean Startup and the whole concept of Steve Blank, and going through a process, a very formal, structured process of figuring out what the problem is, gave me a lot of direction and focus. So initially I have, and I think for entrepreneurs that have a technical background. So I originally had a technical background. I went to school, computer science, information systems, and then kind of moved over to the management side and the business side. But what that did was that it gave me, I had a bias, I had blinkers on. I didn't realize it, but I would always default to the technical solution and the most elegant technical solution to a problem before trying to figure out really how to solve that problem. And so the journey started conceptually in the knowledge access space and trying to get access for people because I did my undergrad in the US, spent a number of years in the US before I moved back to Nigeria. And when I moved back to Nigeria, it was essentially to work on, the government at the time was trying to put together a technology village, like a knowledge hub, kind of similar to what you have now in Canada and different parts of Canada, and of course in the Valley and other different technology clusters. Even though some of these have evolved organically, in the case of Nigeria, there was almost like a government fiat to try to create a knowledge cluster. And so I ended up writing what became the project report of how that process could be done. And that's how I moved back to Nigeria 2004 to work on it. And so my understanding and interaction with entrepreneurship came from that. Almost like it was a smack you in the face type of experience, because I moved from the US where I had access to reliable internet information and all those resources into an environment where connectivity was an issue. So at the time I moved back, every internet connection was basically like a VSAT connection or something like that. And so being faced with that drove me to try to solve a technical problem around access to information. And it wasn't until much later when I got married and had my kid that I realized when it was time for him to go to school and he wasn't meeting his developmental milestones and eventually had to move to Canada, that I realized that it was more specific in terms of an access to educational resource information. And that's kind of what focused me and crystallized that direction. And of course, Embed helps, the process of going through the different aspects of the problem and talking to customers and all of that. Yeah.
So I'm trying to map out the journey here. Did you see the problem in Nigeria first, and then you thought, hey, the master's program in entrepreneurship at Waterloo could really help me solve this problem, and then you came here for school for that?
Yeah.
Or was it more you kind of had an idea and then it crystallized in the program?
Yeah. So I think it was a little bit of both, but actually more, I wouldn't even say it was something that was orchestrated or planned. So I had a sense of the problem, a firsthand sense of the problem, which I was trying to solve. And I tried the different iterations of trying to solve that problem before I came to Canada. But coming to Canada wasn't actually a plan. Coming to Canada was, if you want to call it divine serendipity. I had no plan. My son was missing his developmental milestones. We tried for a year in Nigeria to get him help. There weren't access to no resources. I mean, even understanding of autism, I had no understanding of autism or special needs. And then the schools he was even in didn't either. Like they were saying, oh yeah, some kids are slower than others, some kids are this and that. And we spent a year trying to get him help and support. He had a one-on-one teacher and all that in school, and it just wasn't working. So at some point, I had an uncle in New Brunswick, and we got referred to come to Canada to actually do an assessment. That's where he got diagnosed. So at that point, everything was taken out of my hands. I didn't have any control. Ended up moving here because of kids' ability. Yeah, that's my son. I'm gonna say hi.
Hi. I want to give you the black phone. Black phone.
I'm on the call right now, okay? I'll be right
Where's
now.
the black phone?
It's upstairs. Go talk to mom, okay? So yeah, so that's my son. He's verbal now, but you can imagine he was non-verbal by this time. This was probably when he was 4, and so ended up coming to Kids Ability and Waterloo, and I didn't know that there was anything about entrepreneurship in this environment, or even think about going back to school. And so when moved here to support him, and it was after I got here that I was still thinking about this problem and looking at my own situation where I had to leave and uproot my family and realizing not everyone had that option. So what could I do in terms of a solution that could provide some sort of a service that could provide access to those resources for people who couldn't do the same thing, right? And this was more broadly across education. It wasn't just about special needs. It's the fact that even in conventional education in Nigeria and in parts of Africa, it's significantly underfunded, and so access to resources is a critical issue for both teachers and students. So then when I realized where I was and decided to go back to do MBED, it was in the process of MBED and applying for MBED. I said, oh, you had to have an idea of something you wanted to work on. And I was like, oh, well, access to this, access to educational resources, got into the program, then going through all the market validation and talking to customers with Steve, our classmate and my co-founder, that we then realized, okay, this is really what the real problem is. Underlying all of this is how do you get world-class quality resources in the hands of teachers to give them an additional resource that they can use to improve and impact learning positively. So that's kind of how the journey went.
So this concept of customer validation, like every entrepreneurial concept has customer validation at its backbone.
Yeah.
And with your market being in Nigeria, what was that customer validation process for you being here in Canada?
Yeah. So I guess for me, I had an advantage and a disadvantage. So the advantage was I had lived the problem and experienced the problem firsthand. The disadvantage, again, like I said, was my anchor on my technical background. But then just the process that validation forces you to do, which is to go out of your own how should I put it, comfort zone and talk to people who have this problem beyond yourself is very, very helpful. So if you typically would have any biases, the structured format of how you conduct that validation is critical. The additional advantage I had was that beyond experiencing the problem when I was in Nigeria versus here, but then I had contacts I could tap into and reach out to people for scheduling, discovery calls, customer discovery calls, solution interviews, and things like that. But of course, it wasn't always convenient because you always have to work around the schedule, right? So I was doing discovery calls at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. It was a combination of sometimes Zoom and to Google Meets, different types of platforms, sometimes just a regular phone call. To be able to do some of those calls, but it was very well structured in a way that then gave us the insights to figure out what the solution needed to be. But that I think going through that process is very, very critical because it helps you to cut through the chase. It helps you to kind of step out of yourself. And when we were in Embed, the whole idea of go out and talk to customers, it's something that can be said enough, because I think oftentimes people who are entrepreneurial and innovative tend to sometimes over-engineer a solution to a problem, or even misunderstand the problem that they're trying to solve because they're looking at it from this broad view versus narrowing down and focusing on the customer and their needs and their pain points, and then figuring out what the solution to that could be. Because the solution could also be a sequencing thing. It's not just about the solution. It's also about what comes first. How do you prioritize what the pain points or the characteristics of the solution for a problem could be as well.
Okay, so I've got one more question before I'll turn it over to everybody else. Of course, I have another list of questions, but we'll stop it here before I turn it over. How would that customer validation process look different if you were operating in a Canadian market versus a Nigerian market versus perhaps somewhere else in the world? Mm-hmm. And to add to that, right, to add to the international aspect, what differences also exist, because there's an impact focus to your venture. It's not just about money. There's a real social problem that you're solving. Yeah. So how does the international dimension and the social dimension impact that customer validation process that you have to undergo?
Yeah. I think the biggest impact when you're doing international is all about culture, right? It's the cultural, unsaid or unspoken cultural nuances of, for example, conducting discovery, especially where if you're not able to be there in person. But then back when we were doing it, yes, it was different and difficult. But post-COVID now, everyone is doing discovery online. Like, so we're all like, I don't know any startup right now that's doing discovery where they're still going and doing in-person interviews. Very difficult, right? So everyone has kind of transitioned to that. So from that construct, I think it's now similar in terms of the mediums for doing it, whether it's over a phone call, whether it's over Zoom or Google Meet or whatever it is you're using to do the discovery call. I typically would suggest having a visual call so that you can actually see visual cues and things like that, because it's not just when you're doing a discovery call and you're just reeling out some questions and the person is responding. It's also looking at the body language, the nuances and all of that. In terms of international, the differences between, for example, Canada and Nigeria would be things around, like I said, cultural nuances, being able to interpret different signs. And so typically, if you're doing just like any other thing where you're doing a business with a different culture, it's always important to have context, to have some kind of context, have some kind of insight to the culture of the place or the customers, where your customers are based, having a sense of what that it looks like and how to phrase your questions. Some questions will come across differently. You're trying to find out something. In some cultures, people are not very direct. So I'll give you a perfect example. Is working with from my own experiences in a market where we're trying to conduct discovery calls, and in the culture, it's typically the business culture is, before we do discovery, we want to know what we're talking about, right? Here, you can talk about a very brief blurb about what you're doing, and people don't mind talking to you if it's a problem, like that. They're used to that, right? So for example, in Nigeria, it wasn't that simple. You basically had to build some level of connection to the subjects, explain why you were conducting the research before you would actually get the audience and someone who would give you reliable, one, to give you the time, and then give you reliable information and feedback that was helpful as well. So I think it's the cultural nuance is critical. But in terms of the way it is done now, I would have said before now, typically in Canada, you could, go sit down for coffee, meet someone up for and do the call that way. But now it's increasingly moving remote, and I think that also presents its own opportunity because it widens the pool of who you can talk to depending on where they are as well. And then,
Awesome.
sorry, to the point about impact, sorry. So for impact, I think it's an existential issue, I think, in a lot of ways. We've struggled with that. In some instances, we actually did feel frustrated trying to launch an impact venture, especially internationally. So launching an impact venture is difficult on its own, like, a lot of times there's almost like you're wrestling, it's almost like, is it profit or is it impact? Is it profit or impact? And then, especially if it's going to be something that needs venture funding, like a venture-backed business, it can be tough, especially in the early stages. The reason being, if you're going to go along the impact route, there's some things that you could do that are impactful, but not necessarily, at least in the short term, profitable, right? And so being able to maintain that balance between your priorities and always figuring out what your North Star is. So your North Star in terms of why are we doing this? What's the one thing that we're measuring that's taking us closer to the goal that we need to be getting to? And so depending on how you pick that and how you balance all of the different things that you do to keep on making progress towards that North Star, will have a direct impact on how your your social enterprise unrolls, whether it's international or not. I think for us, international just made it much harder in terms of getting funding and support. But the beautiful thing, I think, and I must say this about specifically about Canada, is that there have been a lot of support. There have been a lot of supporters and advocates that we would never be successful without those, right? And the one thing that attracted them to support and to provide that support has been the impact mission about what we're trying to do as well. And so I think being able to tap into local ecosystems, being able to network effectively amongst organizations that have a shared interest in the space that you're working in is also very, very critical, because it does get very, very tough and very hard when you're launching an e-business internationally, not to talk of when you're doing one that is social, where people think, oh, well, they hear social, they think it's not going to be successful or sustainable. Whereas you might have a fantastic business model and all you need is the pieces to put it together, but you don't have the funding to even stay alive to get it done. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So I'll pause on my questions and I'll turn it over to everybody else. If anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind. You spoke about the several resources that were really helpful to you that were provided from the Canadian standpoint. Could you speak to those a little bit?
Oh yeah, okay. So I think the most critical one, I think, was being plugged into the Waterloo ecosystem, just because of where I was, right? And when I say Waterloo, it's beyond even just the university, right? It's just being in a space where, for instance, I just remember very early when on getting here, and I would talk about the problem and what we're trying to do. It was always, listen, and I would focus on tech, for instance. It was like, no, don't worry about the tech. We can build anything can be built in Canada. So that's not the issue. The issue is the problem you're trying to solve, how you try to solve it, and all of that. And then you would then go on to connect to people, like, even if they didn't have the help directly, it was almost like it was a very strong paid forward type of culture. I think is the way I can explain it, where people gave of their time, gave of their insights and connections and referrals. And specifically to organizations, if I were to mention one, for example, the Conrad School that is the home to the MBEP program, of course, was very critical to us even starting. In fact, in some of the initial funding that we got to get equipment and start building out, and the solution was actually from MBED. We got support from the University of Waterloo's Velocity program. We went through Velocity. We had incredible mentors. We had incredible other founders in the network, the mentors and the coaches and all of that. We also went through the Google, at the time it was called the Community Tech Edge program. So Community Tech is also a big ecosystem player here, where we went through the Edge program, and there was a lot of support from both the business side and the technical support and all of that. We were connected to St. Paul's Greenhouse, which is also a major social entrepreneurship center here. So I think just generally being plugged into the networks, and I think that's the critical thing here, was there was never a situation where we needed help or support, even if it couldn't be provided. It was almost like we got a referral. And so having a clear understanding of the ecosystem and the players within the ecosystem is very, very important. After we did, or while we were even in Velocity, for instance, because a lot of what we were doing involved renewable energy, we were connected to a local, like a research institute within the university called WISE. So WISE is the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy, and it's part of the Affordable Energy for Humanity initiative. Without their support at a very critical point, Hitch would be dead, right? And so, but we didn't know who they were. This wasn't something where I came in and I knew everybody. No, we just had a mission, and we were kind of going for events and connecting to people. And it was that paid forward networking connections that connected us to all those different opportunities that we were then able to kind of leverage and string together and become successful. And so I think, maybe that's the thing I will say that's important for anyone, John, to your point, is being able to network, like knowing that going in, listen, I don't have all the answers, don't have all the resources. If I silo myself off of it and I don't connect, then it's going to be even much more harder. But if I do connect, and if I go out there and if I talk about the problem and speak on it in different fora, you never know where the connection is going to come from to be able to connect you to the next resource that you need to move forward. And I think that was the critical role for us, was just being able to keep at it, and then we got connected to the ecosystem, and it has spread from there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And I guess to add on to that, Uche has talked a lot about the Waterloo ecosystem. So have to plug our Halton Peel region ecosystem. Edge, excellent resource, right? So similar to kind of the Conrad School and Velocity, also in the Waterloo ecosystem. iCube is available, very similar as well. And then there's MBEC, the Mississauga Business Enterprise Center. There's the Brampton Entrepreneur Center. So lots of resources, and wherever you go, in the ecosystem, get plugged in, right?
Yes.
Get plugged into at least one center, because then the dominoes start falling, right? Yeah. They introduce you to somebody else, and it just continues to spiral. So get plugged into the ecosystem, get to know people, and that way you will get that time from them. You will get the insight. You will get the referrals, and also don't forget to continue that culture of giving as well.
Exactly. In fact, I was going to say, to your point, John, now that you mentioned it, I met, I think, I'm trying to remember what her role was in the Brampton City government, but on a trip just to give you a perfect example of how the networks kind of work. So I got referred to, because we were launching in Nigeria with Canadian startup. I was visiting Nigeria at the time, and then an opportunity came out because there's this organization called Nigerian Canadian Investment Group, where they're trying to connect Canada and Nigeria alongst different trade partnerships. And what's interesting was that at the time, there was the city of Brampton, I think, was represented. I think the mayor had either been to Nigeria at some point before then or after that, but the one of the top people within the city innovation team was actually in Nigeria, in Abuja, at the conference, speaking to those partnerships, and actually had some startups from Brampton actually presenting there. And so that created an opportunity for me to network with them and grow. So to the point about networking, it's not even isolated to Waterloo. I think with every region in Canada, I think it's a Canada-wide phenomenon. I'm sure the same thing happens in the States, but I think Canada is very well positioned from the standpoint of being able to draw on the different centers of excellence and entrepreneurship and innovation, and then connecting them together. And so, yeah, I would go ahead and reiterate everything that you said to say, being willing to go out and network. It doesn't have, don't isolate yourself. Plug into wherever you need to plug into. Even at that conference, for instance, we were getting connections that should say, hey, do you guys want to run a pilot in Brampton, for instance? So those types of opportunities will come up. I think the main thing for every entrepreneur is to lean into any opportunity where you can connect to resources and that kind of thing.
Awesome. Questions from the audience?
Yeah, I had a question.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Here, I'll just go real quick. I was just wondering, are you incorporated in Canada or in Nigeria?
Yeah, so we're incorporated in both. And it's funny, it was only after we incorporated we found out that Nigeria and Canada do actually have they have a treaty. There's a double taxation treaty between Nigeria and Canada that actually makes it even more advantageous for us to be linking the Canadian innovation and enterprise system to the market in Nigeria. So yeah, we're incorporated in both places. Yeah.
And are you incorporated as a nonprofit or a charity or for-profit?
So we're incorporated as a for-profit. So the way so in Canada, I think it's just now that they begin to have something called, I think it's a B corporation or so. By the time when we were getting incorporated, there wasn't a lot of clarity around being able to incorporate as both an impact-driven and a for-profit. And so between the two, in order to be able to attract the level of capital we needed to build out the solution and serve the market, we had to incorporate as a for-profit. But then what's important is that a lot of the key metrics around how we're building out the venture from a success standpoint or milestone-driven standpoint is all about impact. So yes, we want to be sustainable, but we're not optimizing strictly for the for-profit. We're optimizing for the impact and the growth and the development impact that our venture can have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll go next. Those are actually some of my questions. But I think my main question is, who exactly is your customer? Is it the families? Is it the institutions that serve the families? Is it the people with autism? And I guess the second part of that question is, how did you arrive at those people, those individuals being your customer? And was it what was that journey like?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, so the customers are so for us, the primary customers are schools, and the schools would be purchasing on behalf of their students and their teachers. Now, because of the way the education space is in Nigeria, a lot of the schools, except unless they're private schools, a lot of the school decisions aren't made at the school level. They're made at the governmental level. So in that case, it's the government, right? But one of the things that we quickly realized playing in the space was that to get into the market and be able to prove and validate that the solution was helpful, we actually went private first. Now, the difference or the distinction here is that in private school in Nigeria or in Africa is completely different from the concept of private school in here. So just to give you an understanding, here, typically private schools are expensive, or pricey. It's a premium service. In Nigeria, it's both a premium service, but also a very low-end, low-income service as well. And this is because the public school system can't keep up. The investments in public school education just cannot keep up with the pace of growth of the demographic. So for example, in Nigeria, less than 20 people under 25 are like, I think 65-70% of the population, just to give you a sense of what it is. The government just can't keep up. And even in the schools where they are able to keep up, the quality isn't anywhere close to what it should be. And so a lot of private sector organizations have sprouted up providing low-income private school options. They're low-fee paying private schools, they're middle-income private schools. So being able to launch into the private market, these schools make decisions more like small and medium-scale businesses than they do like traditional conventional school boards. In that case, it's about whether or not the solution meets their requirements and their needs, and then they make a purchase decision. What that means is that it's harder because you're dealing with instead of saying here where you sell to the school board and then all the schools kind of cascade down from the school board, there you're kind of going after these customers individually. But to the point about how we arrived at it, was just discovery. So it wasn't something that we kind of knew going in. It was more like an understanding or an appreciation or interaction with the problem, and then conducting discovery calls and solution interviews to figure out. So typically you would have a school owner, you would have a school head teacher, and then you'd also have teachers, and all of these different players had an input into the buying process. But typically, once the decision to make, decision to purchase is made by the leadership, then the users in this case then become the students and the teachers who are the beneficiaries of the product. Of course, then in switching to the public school sector, which is actually most of the market, what we then realized was that we had to figure out a different strategy for how to approach sales to the public school system. Now, to be frank, the public school systems, it's harder, it's tougher, it's longer, it's more complicated, a more complicated sales process. It's not often, sometimes in some cases, very opaque. And so some of the stuff that we've had to do is to prioritize those governments that are currently doing reform in the education space and focus our efforts there. Another thing we've also done is form strategic partnerships to people who are already selling into those markets, and then offering our service as an almost like a supplementary thing to them. To the specific point around the kids, whether it's the family or not, we do have a product, or we do have features on a product that can be used by parents who want to purchase on behalf of their kids. In that case, again, the parents then become the customers. That's a more at-home service where the parent is the customer making, again, a purchase on behalf of their kid. I don't know if that answers your questions.
I'm guessing yes, and don't want to distract Sean from having to unmute and take his eyes off the road. So really interesting, something I want to point out here, because you mentioned that, you know, you went through private schools first to validate the model because it was a path with less resistance. And you also mentioned that the private schools in Nigeria were different. And this is something that I can relate to because I'm from Hong Kong, and the private schools there are like, it's kind of the dominant way of education. You would go to a private school, and it wasn't like, you know, the majority of people will go to public schools like in Canada. So I think that really speaks to that cultural nuance that you mentioned, Uche, that like if you didn't have that frame of mind, you wouldn't know how dominant the private sector is in education, right? You would think that it's kind of more mimicking the Canadian system. So I think that was really cool as an example of how that plays out.
Yeah. I think even another interesting one that we stumbled across was that even in the public school space, especially because of underfunding and inefficiencies in public school sector, you've actually had a situation where some private companies under their CSR mandates actually take under their wing, almost like a sponsored school type of thing, where they take a public school and then they refurbish it and they provide additional resources and all that to support the school directly. And so what's interesting in that case, they then become the customer. So you're right, it's interesting to see. And so I think, again, not to overemphasize it, but I mean to overemphasize it, discovery is key, because it's only discovery that can help you kind of uncover those hidden secrets. You might have a hypothesis, but go in expecting your hypothesis to be wrong, and ask enough questions to uncover those frictions and those signs that it could be wrong. And if they're not, then great, right? It's a win-win either way. But if it is wrong, then you then figure out what the next thing is, right? So it rarely ever is where, oh, it's wrong and that's the end of it. No, there might be something you can do and adjust. And a lot of those insights would come from the people you're talking to. They'll be the ones to say, hey, so why don't you do it this way? Like, you know, if have you thought about this? And then you're almost like a detective on the trail of you're putting the clues together. That's kind of how I see entrepreneurship, and being able to do it very quickly and kind of cycle through that process is also a very great focus to have when you're going through it. Yeah.
Anybody else have questions before I jump in?
Yeah, I had a question. Another question, if you don't mind. So, so you did incorporate in both Canada and Nigeria. Now, if you were to start again, like from scratch, would you incorporate as a nonprofit in order to get more, funding, or would you stick with your original plan, which was to stay as a for-profit?
If I had to do it again, and I would actually do it as a B Corp, like so have the social, like the for-profit elements as well as the impact side, right? I think, and this is not to say that there are no nonprofits that have done it successfully, but I think part of the advantage um, of having the ability to deploy capital in that sense where you're innovating as opposed to maybe you're implementing programs is that it's not always very well defined what it is that you want to do, right? So I think the iterative process of finding what your product market fit is often lends itself better if you are either a social enterprise or for-profit one. Typically with a nonprofit, you might even go in, so I'll give you a perfect example of Sage, like you could go in with a hypothesis and you get this incredible funding and you go in and a lot of the assumptions and hypotheses that you've made might be wrong, where you might get the numbers, you might even get the impact and the scale in terms of, okay, I've rolled out this project because someone has paid for it, but then being able to sustain the operations, being able to sustain the model and the product in the market is even more important, right? And so that element of sustainability beyond it being that a beneficiary or funder is just providing funds for you to do it, in itself then becomes harder. So I think for us, it definitely made it harder. I think if we were a nonprofit, we probably have gotten the resource we needed much quicker. But I also think that there has been an interesting thing on this journey that I've honestly, it's almost like we didn't plan it, but it just happened where the longer we stayed at the problem, and the more, the harder it got, the more easier it became clear what we needed to do to be able to succeed. And it's brought us to a point now where we're finally at the point to scale this. We did go through, for example, an accelerator called Hacks in 2018. And typically, coming out of an accelerator, went in September, we're done early 2019. Typically, you would raise like a seed round of investment and then just step the foot on the gas. In our case, it has taken us longer, right? We went in with a hypothesis. We've had to tweak that model along the way and make subsequent pivots. And so I think that process of searching for what that final thing is also very important because, again, you're optimizing for not just the impact, but you're also maximizing for the innovation that's going to keep this project sustainable. And I think it's if I had to do it over again, social enterprise would be my preferred option. If you could marry the impact driven side and then almost like the for-profit venture style side. And then if the second option, it would be for-profit before I would consider non-profit. Not because the non-profit isn't a way to go. I think it's just the peculiarities of the problem that we are trying to solve, and in a way that keeps the model sustainable in the long term. So this is something where we would love to run it and scale it and let it, it's almost like you have a spark and an ignition and then it just takes off on its own. That's kind of where we spent a lot of the time trying to build the value. I think over time, it will be exponentially beneficial. But I think going in, we had no way of knowing that. But to your point, I think if we had to do it, social enterprise definitely, but then as a fallback, it would have to be for profit.
And
thank you.
For those of you who might not be familiar with the B Corp certification, essentially you have to be incorporated as a for-profit to get this certification. So it's not like you register with the government as a B Corp. It's a certification, and then they help you redo your governing documents to say that, hey, you are a for-profit and also you're focused on impact. So I put a link in the chat if anybody's curious to learn more. Anybody else have any other questions for Uche?
I'll go again if nobody has a question.
Okay.
So you were talking about sponsorship or a partnership, sorry. And so how did you go about increasing your credibility with other companies or other players in the market who already have, a foot in the door with the government, whether it's in Nigeria or here in Canada. I was just wondering how you develop those partnerships.
Yeah. So that I think yeah, that's a fantastic question. So to the first one of the things we did was, and I'm sure John will remember this from our 6-year class with Margaret, right? I don't know if you remember the ecosystem network where we did where you had to kind of do like a scan, the balancers, the enablers, the customers, the suppliers. So basically, it's almost like you look at your industry and you try to figure out who are the suppliers, who are the buyers, who are the or the customers, who are the complementers or enablers, who are the enhancers. So when you have almost like an ecosystem map, it makes it easier. So that's the first place I would start. I would say anyone, before you do anything, kind of do an ecosystem map. So that helps you pick out. So it's not a knee-jerk thing. It's very strategic. So that's the first thing that we did. We did that ecosystem map. And there've been a couple of very helpful books I would suggest, and I don't know, I'm not trying to plug anyone, but books that I found that were very beneficial to me were the book by Ron Adler. I'm trying to remember the name now. I think it's the Innovation Ecosystem. I'll find the name before we finish, but essentially helps you. It took different case studies. For example, Apple with the iPod, Amazon with the Kindle, of products that traditionally people just think, when you think of the iPod, people just think, oh, Apple had this product and they launched it and it was successful. No, it wasn't that way. They had to figure out partners in the ecosystem, partner with them, and then introduce the innovation. And so that's kind of the same approach that we took. We had this ecosystem map. And then when you figure out the ecosystem, then you begin to narrow down to the players. And so, for example, one of the things we, of course, realized is that if you're doing technology in Africa, and this is specific to, it's not only specific to Africa or to Nigeria, it could be anywhere else, depending on the type of product that you're trying to deliver. In our case, where infrastructure is a challenge, you might need connectivity to a mobile network operator. In this case, for bandwidth or for connectivity, because of the type of product that we're delivering. You also look at other aspects of the ecosystem. And for instance, one of the things we realized was that we needed access to distribution. So distribution in this case now means because there are frictions in introducing any service in the education space, you have to figure out who are the players in the space that you could complement their product and then go from there. And so once you do that ecosystem map, it makes it easier for you to see where everybody fits, and then it helps you then craft your pitch to them. Now, crafting the pitch is also like discovery. So even this ecosystem map I'm talking about is also like discovery, because when you map it out, you can test it out while you're doing discovery with different people who are more knowledgeable about the space. They could be SMEs, they could be people who are already playing in the industry that you do discovery with. Those people will eventually validate or invalidate a lot of the assumptions you have about your ecosystem map. And they might even point you in the direction of more people. So when you've kind of gone through that process, you begin to get a clearer understanding of the space and who naturally you could complement, who you would maybe seem to as a threat or whatever. So you begin to figure out who is who, and then you can craft your messaging in approaching them. So in approaching them, essentially, once we figured out what they were, their role was in the ecosystem, we could then craft a pitch to them that we felt aligned or at least resonated with a certain aspect that was critical for them. Because at the end of the day, a lot of organizations have different products, but if you look at what at the core, if you simplify what they do to the core of it, you're able to get a sense for what might resonate. So that also helped us in then crafting that. And so I would say, yeah, start with the ecosystem map. It doesn't matter where it is, whether it's in Canada or the US, is the same thing, right? And then figure out how you're going to, who you need, and then how you're going to craft the messaging to them. And then after that, it's just about being dogged, right? You will hear a lot of no's. Some people might say yes, they might waste your time. You think they're wasting your time. They're just going at the pace that they used to go in. And along the way, you pick up a lot of lessons, and eventually you stay at it long enough, you will find that one partner that gets it. Again, networking is key, because if you do lean into the network, you might get along faster if you get to a key decision maker. Oftentimes, depending on the industries, you're dealing with very huge organizations. Another clue could also be to tap or identify a group within the organization that, for example, is responsible for innovation or business model innovation, or or being able to incorporate new products and services and new business development. Starting with a group like that within the organization, you might get better or farther along than, say, for example, going to a part of the business that's maybe a little bit more conventional and more focused in the way they operate. They might not be willing to take risks or chances. And so I think following that in any market, I think eventually could lead to success. Again, to the point about being part of ecosystems, you could actually get introduction. So for example, some of the earliest introductions we had into Nigeria, into, for example, some of the tech ecosystem players in Nigeria was actually made for us when we were in the Communitech Edge program. And so being able, for example, if Edge at Sheridan has access to those types of networks and makes those type of connections, you'll be surprised at some of the doors you can open for any of the social or any of the businesses that are launching from within your network, launching into new markets. So building those network relationships are critical, so that when you do have an ask for someone, once you pick out this is the person or this is the organization that can really help us be successful, you can tap your network to figure out who can help you. Another little secret I would suggest is use LinkedIn. I know people talk about LinkedIn and how it's some people say stodgy, it's this, is that, people are turning it into Facebook and all that, but I will tell you the number one secret weapon for me has been LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn, so I use it a lot, tap into networks, try to find who knows who. Sometimes, yes, people might connect to people they don't know very well. That's okay, that's fine. But what you begin to find out is maybe based on activity of the person you're trying to reach out to, you can see something that they post on their LinkedIn and they kind of use that as an in to have that conversation going forward as well. So yeah, those are some of the things I would suggest.
Just as a follow-up question, I was just wondering, with the partnerships, you're finding people who will, work with you. And I was just curious, did you have anything in writing, like a contract with them? Was there an exchange of funds, or was there how did your partnerships, did you find, like, it was just, oh, you both have the same goals?
Okay, you mean like
we're going to work together?
The partners we found? Okay. No. So
Yeah.
no, written. It was written. So a lot of times you will end up having to draft those agreements because they don't want to bother their lawyers and things like that. So being able to invest in finding drafts and creating drafts, yeah, definitely. But yes, we did have those interactions. It typically would start sometimes over a phone call. Another thing that has worked, and again, to the point about launching internationally, and I don't know, it just depends on the market where you're going. So for example, in Africa and specifically in Nigeria, WhatsApp is like the secret communication channel. So a lot more people would respond to me on WhatsApp than, for example, via email. But then it would start with an initial call, maybe even an initial WhatsApp text, and then conversation starts from there, moves to email. And then once we get to the point where they're saying, okay, yeah, we're good to go, typically, okay, and you write them formally, you write them formally, they respond to you. Typically, you have to kind of draft the agreement. They'll make changes and say, hey, no, we don't like this, we don't like that. Go ahead and implement all the things that you need to do. But the faster you get that back stuff, and the faster you turn around, the faster sometimes the process can move as well. And so yeah, go in with a mindset that you might be responsible for a lot of the documentation, but always insist on it, because it's also helpful to you, especially when you're within your team and with your with anyone who's looking to that. And another interesting thing is people. Even beyond just ecosystem partners where that can help you directly in the business, the other things, like to the point you made about getting validation. So when we went in the process of doing discovery and doing research, we found out that there were some international development organizations working in Nigeria that were in the space. And so one of them, for instance, was a program by the UK DFID. So DFID is, I think they've changed the name now, I can't remember, but it's the kind of the UK version of the Global Affairs Canada, or the UK version of USAID, right? US Agency for International Development. So they're working in Nigeria, and they were doing research specifically in the private sector space. So in fact, it was their research that helped us understand what was going on in the education space, and the role of private education, and how proliferated it had become, and how it was actually maybe 80%, 90% of the market was low income, middle income. It was actually from their research. And so what we did at that point was write them. So I wrote them formally. And when I did a couple of calls, even before I got there, when I went there, went to visit them, show them exactly what we're doing. And then they created a case study on about us. And so we used that case study to talk to more schools, talk to more potential customers and partners. And that gave us our first initiative. They were the first ones who took a bet on us to say, hey, what these guys are doing is pretty cool. We see the need, and recommended us and put us in touch with a number of other organizations. We also did eventually get connected to UNICEF, and that was via LinkedIn. I didn't know anyone before. I had no direct connections. It was all through LinkedIn. And then we did an MOU with UNICEF in Nigeria to supply our solution. So I think, again, it's down to figuring out in the ecosystem who can help you, narrowing down, having a plan, contacting them, using tools like LinkedIn and all that to find out who's connected to who, using whatever communication channel. So if it's Signal, if it's Telegram that's popular in that country, get on Signal, get on Telegram, and connect to people. I typically would say the culture is, focus on what the culture, like to the point that John was saying, focus on what the culture finds okay to deal with. Most people will not respond. They might respond to an email, for example, in Nigeria, depends on the email address you send it to. But if they don't actively ask you to send an email, more likely than not, they're not going to respond, but they will respond to maybe WhatsApp. They might respond to a phone call or text or whatever. And so if they say, oh, go ahead and send me email, and you ask them the email, they give it to you, then they probably might respond. So I think it's the nuance of understanding how the market operates. Maybe also before you get into a market, you definitely want to talk to people who are already used to operating in that market versus people who are just general mentors on the entrepreneurship level, people who have knowledge and experience of dealing in that market. Like if you're going to India, you're going to China, you need to talk to people who can give you a sense of the nuance of how things operate in that market, because that can also help save you a lot of headache and a lot of heartache too. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I saw Michelle, you had unmuted for a second there. Did you have a question?
I'm trying to remember what my question was, but I'm just impressed at the work that you do. Like, I'm at the initial stages, and that's why I'm here, of just having a conversation around entrepreneurship and international. My focus is a little bit different from yours, but it's the same population. And I just reached out to you on LinkedIn, just FYI. But it's to bring solution-focused coaching to Jamaica. It's teaching the children. My background is education. I taught there for many years and as a guidance counselor. And I did this course in solution-focused coaching. And I'm saying, where was this when I had 1,000 students to support? And so I want to take that to the schools to give the teachers, the parents, and the students the language to express themselves. Because a lot of times you have violence because you have frustrations, because we're not talking the same language. Parents not talking to their children. There's no common language. And so what that allows is a framework to allow them to express themselves and have those conversations. So as you're talking about special needs, which incidentally, we do, I've done some work in that space. And so I'm listening to you and I'm literally soaking it in, because I am at the proposal stage, and that I did a course at U of T, and I did my proposal similarly to yours as a part of that course. And so I'm just listening to you and trying to figure out, where did you even get startup funding? Like, where did you get money? That was my question. Where did you get money from as a student to start all of this? So that's where I was.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing, and definitely I'll accept you on LinkedIn. So thank you. It's a great question, very interesting. Incidentally, I think one of your greatest assets is going to be the fact that you taught in Jamaica, and you have networks that you probably can tap into. So I'll tell you for free, the best place to start is just talking to the people who are in it right now. So if they're teachers, who are going to be who's going to use your product and who's going to pay for your product, right? And then figuring out who, at least at a hypothesis level, who that's going to be. You probably are clearer on who's going to use the product than you are on who's going to pay for the product. Because oftentimes you go into the market and you find out, oh, this is who's going to pay, and then like, oh no, we're not interested. Because you might even find an instance where you say, oh, I go to the school and it's the school, but you find out that it's even broken down more granularly in the school. So there's one, so that you think, oh, it's going to be this unit or this this department in the school, and it turns out to be another department or unit, right? And so that's where the discovery is going to come in for you. So I think the first thing I would suggest is talking to the potential users and beneficiaries of it. So if it's going to be teachers, talking to them to kind of get a sense for whether this is a problem that they face. Typically, I would say, again, just like with the whole customer discovery thing, don't necessarily bias them by telling them what the solution it is that you want to give them. Talk about the problem, right? Start with the problem, and that's kind of where you connect with them from, because you might find out more stuff where at the back of your mind, you know what your solution is or you're thinking about, but then there might be things that are uncovered in the process of talking to them where you can do it. And the easiest way to do this, I would suggest maybe use like Facebook groups. I know that a lot of groups, for example, in Nigeria on Facebook, some of them on WhatsApp. And I want to say that Jamaica might be the same. You might even tap into some of the organizations in Jamaica that are set up to promote innovation and entrepreneurship and things like that, like whether they're hubs of information or hubs of activity or support for small business or whatever. You might actually have some connections into them to get a clearer picture of what the landscape will be. So for example, they might be able to connect you to a school decision maker or buyer or potential buyer for you to conduct some discovery, for instance. But I think the first place to start is discovery, but generally the users in terms of what it is. Now, to my own specific or our own specific experience. So while we were in the Embed program, actually just before I got into the Embed program, there was a hackathon that was held here in Kitchener-Waterloo, and just when I just joined and ended up forming a team that went on to win the hackathon. So the first amount of money I got to do this was from a hackathon. It also came with free incorporation, so I didn't have to pay for a lawyer, and it also came with some additional resources, and then connected me wider within the ecosystem. That was one. The second thing was that while we were embedded and going through the whole process, and we said, well, this is what we want to do, there were additional resources apparently available if we needed to buy or get equipment that we needed to kind of start building out what the solution was. So we got reimbursement funding for that. So essentially just meant put the stuff on credit card, and then we got reimbursed for it afterwards. And so that helped us to kind of get started. Another thing that happened was that we then applied to go into the University of the Waterloo, like an incubator, like the Velocity, and they do have pitch competitions. And typically you find most entrepreneurs would either, launch with friends or family, like, friends and family provide them funding. But sometimes the pitch competitions are also helpful. So we did a series of pitch competitions. I think we pitched like 3 times. We finally won either on I think it was the 3rd time or the 4th time, I can't remember, that we eventually won money to be able to. So that was our first kind of influx of money. But before then, we had also connected to a research institute on campus that was able to support us with, they were able to pay, for example, for some work to be done for us, and also provide some money to buy some equipment. So for you as an entrepreneur, you might find out that at the early stage, a lot of what you're looking for is not necessarily money. It might be someone who's willing to pay for something that is of benefit to you. So you write it up, for example, for what you're describing. You could write it up where there might be an organization or institute that's interested in the data or the research or the output of what you can provide with your solution, and wouldn't mind funding, for example, students to help you work on it, or give you funding to cover some of the costs of running the project. Ultimately, the benefit is to you, the entrepreneur, and to your venture, because the output of what that will do will help you move closer. And look out for, again, like the pitch competitions and things like that. But again, there's also, Canada has quite a wide ecosystem of supports. I think Ontario is pretty good. For example, there's AC Jumpstart. That is a program that is run by the Accelerator Center and the FedDev Ontario. There are a bunch of other ones too. There's the OCE. We have gotten OCE support. I think it's now called OCI now. And so there are a bunch of other programs out there. And I think typically within the incubator, the hub, you might find someone who is an expert on those types of things. And so 2 types of funding to put into mind. There's equity funding, where you're going to pitch and you're trying to look for an investor. And then there's non-equity or non-dilutive funding, where it's grants and applications that you're writing to basically get access to funding. Both of them are equally important. Sometimes the challenge is equity funding would only come when you can demonstrate some traction and you can demonstrate some progress. That's when the investor feels sufficiently, okay, you know what, I don't mind writing a check. You might find an angel that's willing to write you a check. But essentially, I would say start with the non-equity stuff, because that can also help you. It's harder. I won't say it's not easy, but it's just something that will also help you refine and focus on what is critical and what is important. Other options also include other types of programs where it might even be something to pay for. For example, there's something called soft landing. I think in Canada, I think this is Canada-wide, if I'm not mistaken. So when we would go to Nigeria, they would actually reimburse us for the expenses of what we're doing. For you specifically, I would say also look at something like the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. So a lot of people don't know this, but the Trade Commissioner Service actually supports Canadian enterprise exporting into new international markets. So you going into Jamaica is critical. The only caveat is that a lot of programming from the Trade Commissioner's office would have to be that you haven't sold or made any revenue in that country before you apply. So you want to kind of sequence it well enough where before you make any sales, apply to get funding from Trade Commission Service to cover a lot of your market entry and development expenses as well. So the number of options, Canada is one of the greatest places to set up an enterprise or an organization to do whatever it is, whether within Canada or even internationally. There's a lot of support, and I think connecting to the right resources will guide you. But along our own path, it was kind of that sequence, and then eventually we got accepted into an accelerator, which got in some money. We started generating revenue. We were able to apply for more grant funding that we were eligible for, including, for example, applied research partnerships. You might not know this, but in Canada, I think specifically in Ontario, there are various applied research opportunities where you can connect. And I'm sure Sheridan has those programs where if you partner with Sheridan, they can actually fund research that supports your business as well. And so whether it's technical research, whether it's research specifically around the different types of streams available. And I think having that support and having that strategy around how you want to go about it is key. But I think all of it starts with talking to the users. Who are the people who are going to use this thing? There has to be a need. Like all these organizations are there and they're fantastic, but even they also want to see that there's someone who needs this product, there's someone who needs this service, someone is going to benefit, someone is going to pay. And once you kind of demonstrate all that, then it becomes easier to unlock funding, whether it's non-dilutive funding or whether it's equity funding as well.
I started the conversation. People are happy to have it. The question is, who's going to pay for it?
Oh, great. So are these teachers? So who are the people who would be your...
So what I did, I tapped into the Ministry of Education in the region where I worked. Happened to have gone to high school with the director. So that was an easy conversation for me to have.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the school where I taught, and the principals have changed, but I introduced myself and my name was already there because of the work that I've done in the community.
Okay.
So they have a strong interest, and then I networked into a few schools just to find out, was it a landscape, how I left it. And they're interested. I have principals who have already bought in without me even sending them the full proposal.
Okay.
The $1 million question is, how are we now going to fund any work at all, just because the schools themselves cannot afford to fund extra things because they're on bare minimum.
Okay. So again, so this is where you probably have to innovate around the business model to figure out who has an interest in the space. There are organizations that will fund something if you have evidence of impact. So a lot of what you might look to do is to, one, figure out if you can get a pilot funded that can give you the data you need to make a proposal to some organization who has an interest. So again, going back to the ecosystem mapping, if you figure out who are the players in the space in Jamaica who might have a connection to education, it might not even just be education, it could even be skills. There's a lot of emphasis and focus now on digital skills and upskilling and of making the education system more relevant to the future of work. Now, if that's the case, then you want to do an ecosystem scan and map to see, okay, who are the people playing in the digital skills space, who are the people playing in trying to make sure that people who go through the education system are ready for the future of work and that kind of stuff. So you might find customers outside of the conventional Ministry of Education is buying this or buying that, if you can prove that the product does have the evidence of impact. So of course, it's the egg and chicken riddle, right? And so if I don't have funds, I can't prove the impact. So that's why I was saying, if you then partner with institutions, organizations that could get a pilot funded, then you use the result of that pilot to then justify even more funding and more funding. For education specifically, I will tell you there's a global partnership for education, there are a whole bunch of international organizations with funding for education. What a lot of them want to see is traction. They want to see evidence of impact. They want to see all of those things. So whether the Jamaican government or the Ministry of Education can fund it or not is not an issue, because you do have organizations that want to fund. They're just trying to figure out what works or not. They have funds, but they want to make sure that the funds are going to something that actually does work. And so whether it is UNICEF, whether it's the Global Partnership for Education, there's also something called WISE out of this is a different WISE out of Qatar. I'm trying to remember what the initiatives are, but just type in WISE Qatar. They provide support for education entrepreneurs and people who are trying to make things happen, where they kind of support you with mentorship and all that, but they also then connect you to funding opportunities. And in some cases, depending on what the initiative is, they'll fund. There's another organization called 100. So HUNDRG. I think it's 100.org is the name, is the website. Yeah. 100.org is a website where you can go and create a profile about your innovation, and it's exposed to a number of people. There's another one called Global Exchange. I think it's Global Exchange, where you list your innovation, and then there are a whole bunch of different people that can have access to it. There's another one called MIT Solve. So MIT Solve is just MIT, the university, and then Solve is a challenge where they provide that. You might also look at Google Impact Challenge. Google Impact Challenge is another a major one. So Google does this massive thing, especially in developing countries, where they try to fund projects that can be helpful. So again, your customer doesn't have to be the government, even if it's a government school. What your customer wants is value. That's it. And that's the hardest part about it, is just getting started. And that's why I said leveraging network. For example, I'm sure Edge and Sheridan there's probably an applied research team at Sheridan that can help you figure out. Okay,
I see John nodding. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Uche, thank you so much.
No worries.
This is totally worth my time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And I wish you the best of luck, and I'll connect with you on LinkedIn.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. So Sheridan College definitely has research support. And to give an example, this isn't perhaps related to what you're doing, Michelle, but our LEAP program, our LEAP entrepreneurs in that program, they got access to the Center for Advanced Manufacturing Design Technologies to help them design their first prototype. And beyond that, CAMDIT for short works with more established ventures and organizations to help them figure out advanced manufacturing processes and innovations, and help them secure grants. That's for a bit later stage, but partnerships like that exist with our other research centers as well. And I want to point you to another place called the Open Innovation Challenge, also from Sheridan College. That deadline is coming up soon, so you might want to check it out, Michelle, because it sounds like it's very aligned with what you're doing.
Okay.
I just posted a link
I
in the
saw
chat.
it in the chat. Okay,
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. This is great. Does anybody else have any other questions? All right. Well, back to me. Steve, your co-founder Uche, one of our friends, he told me about a story of how you tried to get him to go to Nigeria to meet with the customers, to meet with the tech people, and he was reluctant. I don't know if he ended up going. He didn't go that instance. I don't know if he has gone yet. My question is, as the leader of your organization, as kind of the person who birthed the idea, how do you get your people, how to get your team on board with understanding these cultural nuances that you speak about, so that you're able to move ahead as a team to navigate the market that you're trying to operate in?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. So I think it was there were a combination of things going on at the time. I think one was we were definitely strapped for cash at the time. And so it was going to be something where it was Steve or another team member and myself. So it was going to be two people going, me and someone else. I wanted it to be Steve just so he could get a sense, because he's building all the tech, right? And so to get a sense for what the market is like and all of that. But it boiled down to, well, which was more important? If he was on the ground, especially because we were deploying a lot of the tech and a lot of the things that we were building out, and he was providing support to me in the field. Like literally, I would be in some instances needing to deploy something, and Steve I have to be on the phone calling him, and it's like, listen, if I'm there with you in Nigeria and the internet is fluctuating or they're having issues or whatever, we won't be able to deploy. I'd rather be in a more stable place where I can push and guide you to do what it is that you need to do. That was one. But I think more generally, having an appreciation for, I guess, connecting the two worlds, I think is the first thing. And I think it's all about reference points and about what people can relate to, right? And so in telling the story about Nigeria and the market opportunity in Nigeria, I think the main thing that I have drawn on is one is a combination of the data, like the market data information that is out there that people have access to, but also anecdotal, like a lot of my experiences and what I've been through and my journey working in Nigeria, and the networks and the things that I've been able to build up are important. Now, to specifically to the point that you're asking, I think as anyone, and you don't even have to be a leader, but if you're trying to persuade anyone about a particular space or issue, the more prepared you are, the more knowledgeable you are, the more data driven you are about the problem and the space, the more successful typically you would be. And this is important because a lot of times, again, to the point about bias and having blinkers and blinders on, is that you might get a sense for a problem just by experience or relationship with the problem. But that's completely separate from being able to prove with data that there is a problem. So over the course of, I think, probably about 60 1-hour discovery calls to Nigeria that took an incredible amount of time, because it wasn't always 1 hour straight. It was sometimes 30 minutes, the line cuts, you have to reschedule, the person is busy, you have to call back at a different time. And this was with school owners, this was with teachers, this was with some principals as well. We were able to get a clear understanding of the picture. And so essentially what I did for the rest of the team was I said, well, these are the notes from the discovery calls. This is the output of the discovery call. Uche is saying, yes, this is the case, but it's not necessarily Uche saying these are the people that have the problem, so listen to them. And so it's very important to provide almost like a flat organization in that sense, where you're connecting the people working on a problem to the people who are having the problem. Sometimes you could step in to serve almost as a cultural interpreter, if you want to interpret like what's happening here versus how it's relayed here and vice versa. But I think your role is to collect and aggregate the data and use the data to speak and make the points that you want to make about how people relate to it. And I think people are more are inspired, yes, by leaders, but I think more importantly, people are inspired by leaders who know what they're talking about. And knowing what you're talking about isn't just saying it, it's also proving it with the data and the research. And that's why a major aspect of any startup, any venture, anything that you're doing with entrepreneurship is around research. And that's what customer discovery really uncovers for you.
Awesome. Lead with data, lead with insights and knowledge. And that will inspire people because they know that you have something to offer them as well. All right, we're almost up at time. I have one question left. Does anybody else want to jump in before I ask my question and we end off the session?
I just have one question, and it's purely of my own personal interest. Uche, if you can share with us the time frame from when you first started on this venture until, say, you got your first sizable contract? What was that timeline like? 6 months, 2 years?
Yeah, so I would say, so we started kind of working on this in August. So September, when we started Embed, was kind of when but it was all part-time. We were still in school. We're kind of validating and all that. So we hadn't formally launched. I would say we formally launched. We actually kind of geared into working on this probably August of 2016, when we were done with the coursework in Embed, and actually started launching it formally. So from then till it wasn't until the middle of 2017, so almost a year, probably about a year, that we got an initial sizable, how should I put it, financial thing that made it work well. Now, it wasn't a whole lot, but it was enough to be able to move the needle. In a lot of international, sorry, one second. In a lot of international business, the timeline from when you start off with a problem to when you get a solution is all driven by who your market is, right? So in our case, it's education. Everybody knows education is hard and it's tough. But for some of the people and some of the ventures, depending on the space, depending on the field. So for example, I do know of some fintech companies that have launched out of Canada here and launched to Africa, that have hit that milestone much quicker, because fintech is hot and people are always looking for solutions. So I think it boils down to the market and the industry that you're operating in. In education, typically the cycles are longer. But I think once we got to that initial and we really dug down into the discovery, it became a much shorter cycle for us to be able to get to that point of having revenues to demonstrate that it was viable.
My question was really designed to satisfy my own concerns, that had you said something like, oh, from beginning to deal, it was like 18 months, I would have started freaking out.
Okay.
But the thing I've come to understand is that in the social venture space, what you start off with, the idea you start off with, rarely is the target that you end up chasing, or
Exactly.
like you said, to use your words, what people are willing to pay for. And it becomes not pivots, but it becomes pulling back layers of stuff, right?
So I guess what it is that international social enterprise really helps you to reduce complexity to simplicity. Very, like, it's that's like the number one thing. Like, at the core of it, what are you trying to do? And you peel away. I love the way you said it. Like, it's not necessarily a pivot, because the mission still to stay. So for a social enterprise, typically, because you're focused on the impact is what you're trying to achieve. The thing that will change is a lot of times is how you want to deliver that impact, how you're going to be able to maximize that impact. So yeah, for social, oftentimes it could be longer. But again, I say it just depends on the space you're playing with. You might be playing in a space where, for instance, a huge organization, let's say like the Gates Foundation, or someone is saying, hey, we want to do a project in this space, and then there's funding for it, and then you go in and you win it. It could also be not that like, I don't want to say easy, but not that straightforward, because even in dealing with those kinds of organizations, there's still a lot of hard work to do to prove for them to want to buy from you. So yeah, social is tough. International social is even tougher. But I think now what has actually happened, I think, even with everything that's gone on with COVID and everything that's going on, especially with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is that there's now becoming a way where people are standardizing impact and sustainability driven solutions around a common standard that now is applicable. So for instance, you have things like the UN Global Compact. I know that there's a Global Compact Canada for Canadian businesses that are interested in sustainability and where their interests lie. So different types of UN Sustainable Development Goals. So Michelle, that might be something you want to look at. So looking at different types of, I think it's globalcompact.ca, looking at different Canadian organizations that are interested in the impact space. Some of them might be saying, oh, we want to do stuff in education. We might want to do stuff. You might even look at Canadian businesses that are based in Canada, but doing business in Jamaica, and who are looking to make commitments, sustainability investments into the communities that they serve. Those are also customers that potentially you could target. And so I think looking at it that way, I think in the search for a customer, once you kind of figure out what the solution, like who needs the solution the most, and you begin to build that ecosystem, it becomes easier to kind of narrow down to it. And then being able to draw these types of parallels between who has an interest in the people you're trying to reach. They might be willing to do something for you. And so I think if we had to do it over again, this is all stuff that I've kind of discovered after the fact. But if I had to do it again, I would have started, for example, okay, you know what, just go look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals and see who has an interest, and figure out who might be willing to play in that space as well. And that, I think those types of things help you de-risk it further, because you might even go and meet someone and they're saying, okay, you know what, if you can meet XYZ, we'll give you a contract to do something. And that alone is enough to allow you see light at the end of the tunnel, versus stepping off and into the unknown typically, and you don't know, oh man, how long is this going to take? Whereas if you have someone who says to you, if you meet XYZ and you can project out and figure out how long it's going to take you, it makes it more predictable. So I think what you're speaking to is the predictability of being able to say, how am I going to get to the point where this thing is sustainable? And I think the way to do that is to look at the ecosystem and then figure out who are the people that can help you make those predictions more realistic.
Awesome. So we've got 30 seconds. I want to end off with one last question. You mentioned social is tough, international social is tougher. So Uche, what do you have to say to inspire or perhaps reassure people to consider this path, whether they thought about it or not?
So I think I love Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And that is inspirational for me on a number of levels, because even if this wasn't on, even if I wasn't, for example, on a personal journey, or I hadn't personally experienced it, I think starting with why you're looking to do something is always very important, because it takes you back to the inspiration and the motivation to keep doing something. I think impact-oriented businesses, from that standpoint, actually have an advantage over people who might not necessarily be thinking about impact, because it lives with you. Yes, it is tough, but I think the commitment to an ideal that's greater than yourself, and is greater than anything that you think you are trying to do, is more important than you even achieving it. So in the attempt itself, you've already succeeded. So I definitely want to make that very clear to people who are considering social and even international social. There is a benefit, there is a reward in that sense from trying, even if you don't get to where you want to. It might not be on that journey, it might be a different journey, but in just thinking about it, that mindset, thinking about something that's bigger than yourself, thinking about making an impact that would outlive you, that will benefit people who ordinarily, if you never took that shot or tried, might never get a chance to get access to what it is that you are trying to deliver for them. Now, it's not a savior mentality in the sense that, oh, if it's not me, no one else can do it. It's more a need for more positively thinking people to band together to want to solve big problems. And I think that's really what it is. The motivating factor is banding together to solve big problems. And I think once we kind of start from that point, it becomes easier to see light at the end of the tunnel. And you go in, don't have any, how should I put it, blinders on regarding how tough it's going to be. Yeah, it's tough, but stuff is tough all around, right? Even if you had a job or you're doing some other business that is really growing fast and successful, it does have its own tough sides to it. And I think understanding that and leaning into your why, and leaning into the motivations and leaning into the impact that you can bring is also in itself a way to refuel when you're getting low on motivation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Uche. We are at our time. Yes, big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Super insightful. I'll hand it back to Cole to finish off the session and say any parting words.
I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much as well. It was wonderful having you here today. And I've enjoyed this entire session, even though I was off camera for a bit. I was eating dinner. So I've loved it, and I'm sure everybody in the call who have already expressed have really enjoyed the insights that you've brought to us. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. For those of you who have not been part of one of our sessions before with Mentor Mondays, we run these sessions roughly every Monday with new subject matter experts on a regular basis. So if you want to stay in the loop for what's happening, feel free to check us out, and feel free to check the different events that we have available via the link that I just posted in the chat. Additionally, I also posted a feedback form. We'd love to hear your feedback on how the session went today. If you enjoyed it, what you enjoyed, maybe how we could do better. It takes about 2 minutes to fill a form like this, and it really helps us out to make sure that we're serving you in the best way that we can. Without further ado, I will stop recording for the evening and wish everybody a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.